Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at Disaster Recovery Journal. Today's sponsor is Symantec, and the topic is reducing unplanned downtime in an always-on world. It will be presented today by Rachel Dines from Forrester and Dylon Mills from Symantec. Before we get started here today, I wanted to review a couple housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. The recording link will be shared with you in the next few days. Attendees are in a listen-only mode. If you would like to ask any questions, please use the question and answer function located within the webcast viewer on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer as many of these questions as possible at the end of the session. Now I'd like to introduce to you our guest speaker today, Rachel Dines. Rachel is a senior analyst with Forrester. She consults to the Fortune 500 and growth companies on topics ranging from IT continuity and disaster recovery services and technology, next generation high availability and backup, to data center strategies. Also joining us today is Dylon Mills. He is a product manager with Symantec responsible for the IT risk management offerings known as Disaster Recovery Advisor. Symantec Disaster Recovery Advisor is a tool targeted at proactively identifying high availability disaster recovery configurations risks in the data center. As the product manager of DRA, Dylon works closely with end users to continuously enhance the capabilities and usability of the product. I'd like to welcome and now turn the mic over to Rachel.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm going to take the first part of the presentation today, and I'd like to start out by walking you through the agenda of what I'm going to be covering before we hand it over to Dylon. I'm going to start out by talking a bit about some of the trends that I'm seeing in the market today, and something specifically that I call the era of now. You'll hear more in a minute. And then I'm going to go over some of the trends and best practices that we found in terms of testing and planning from a continuity perspective. And then talk a little bit about some of this unfortunate data that we also have, that recovery objectives, even though recovery objectives are not really meeting the place that we hope that they would, given the fact that testing and planning are improving. I'm going to wrap up with some recommendations as well as to how you can help move the needle forward, get more proactive, reduce downtime, whether it's planned or unplanned, before I hand it off to Dylon from Symantec for him to talk a little bit more about their solutions. But let's get into it. So when I talk about some of the trends that I see in the industry today, the thing that comes out most often is that organizations are telling me that we've entered this era of now. And this is something that, it's also coinciding with something that we at Forrester call the age of the customer. So essentially, if you think about the way that we've progressed over the years, we've gone from the age of manufacturing through distribution, through information, and now really we're in the age of a world where empowered customers are demanding very, very serious customer orientation. And this, unfortunately or fortunately, is creating an interesting time. It's coinciding with this time where it used to be okay to have days or maybe even weeks of downtime. And then we moved into a time when it was okay to have hours of downtime and then minutes. And what we're moving into this year and for the foreseeable future is what I call this era of now, which is customers expecting services to be always on, always available on any device in any location without delay. And of course, this type of service is very, very difficult to deliver, if not near impossible. And so it's this convergence of the era of now with the age of the customer is what's driving a lot of challenges in organizations that I talk to today. Beyond that, there's a lot of, there's additional trends in the market that are driving some of the, some of the issues and challenges in the recovery space as well. So moving on to talk about some of the changing world and the trends that I see. First of all, data is growing very, very quickly. This is not going to change anytime soon. In fact, between 2010 and 2012, we saw data grow 60%, and many organizations are telling me that it's growing, even faster than that. And some of the big drivers behind data growth are, of course, business drivers and business having increased need for collecting more data, storing more data, doing analytics, but also resiliency drivers are top drivers as well. We need to keep more data in more places. In addition, this increasing recovery demand, which I spoke to a moment ago in terms of the era of now, is also a big challenge in terms of more and more companies are trying to get to this 24/7/365 and also have very limited not only have limited downtime, but have limited data loss. And I just call out as a fact here, 26% of companies have an RPO of less than 1 hour. So that is, quite aggressive trying to get to RPOs of that level. And, I'm seeing more and more organizations try and push in that direction. Beyond that, complexity and heterogeneity are really getting pretty much out of control. We've gone beyond the scale of what I call human complexity. We've reached the age of a time when we need to automate to be able to keep up with the complexity that we have in our organization. And, interesting thing to call out that 48% of business continuity management professionals is from a survey that we did with the DRJ a couple of years ago, so that IT complexity is one of the top risks that you face in your organization. Beyond that, there's more and more mission-critical systems. 36% of applications are considered mission-critical. There's almost as many considered business-critical as well. And in fact, we're getting to a point where there's a very small number that we're considering non-critical. Part of this is being driven by the complexity, of course. So, as there's more systems that are more interdependent, that is going to drive more systems to be more critical. But I also believe that a big part of this is that we still really struggle with business impact assessments and understanding, things that are truly critical versus not. Also in the mix are the mobile employees, and one of the things that this anytime, anywhere, any device worker means that there's a lot of data being created in a lot of places, and also drives this need for availability. And I call it here just as an interesting factoid is that 62% of employees are working on multiple locations during any given work week. So this is something that as we see more employees in more places, and then of course we need to support them as well. This is a big challenge. And then lastly is cloud, and cloud throws a big monkey wrench into a lot of people's strategies. And in fact, one of the SaaS and infrastructure as a service, I call it a fact here about SaaS in 2 years the average company will use 66 different SaaS solutions. Once again, this feeds back into complexity. If you have to worry about the BCDR capabilities for 66 different SaaS providers, that's a lot of different things on your plate to need to worry about. And of course, that just continues to grow. And that's just SaaS. Infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, other cloud-based offerings are continuing to grow. And we need to figure out a way to be able to protect and make sure that we're protecting and doing resiliency and availability for those particular services. So when I get into what's driving this need to be always on, always available, I've talked about a lot of these aspects already. But first and foremost, competitive advantage is a big one. So, if you think, no matter how you slice it, downtime creates an opportunity if you have downtime, it creates an opportunity for your competitors to seize market share. This is something that we see constantly. I mean, a couple months ago, there was an instance where the New York Times had a major outage. It was a big news day. The New York Times website wasn't working. And during that time, the Wall Street Journal dropped their paywall and tried to entice the New York Times customers to come over to them. Big competitive advantage, big potential for seizing market share. But there's also this employee and customer expectation, and that's what I was referring to a moment ago when I was talking about the era of now. Downtime can impact employee and customer confidence and retention. And of course, as you have more and more remote employees, they really expect services to be available on their schedule. Costs of downtime are also significant and growing. One of the interesting data points we picked up from the latest Forrester and DRJ surveys was that the #1 cost of downtime for most companies that had actually experienced a major outage was the productivity of employees. Of course, revenue, penalties and fines, reputation impact are also big as well. A little bit harder to quantify, but definitely important. Accountability as well, fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, to stakeholders, to partners, to suppliers. This is always one of the big drivers that we see for wanting to improve resiliency. And of course, global markets. As you expand globally, and you cross a bunch of time zones, this idea of 9 to 5 workday, and maybe we can do maintenance or have downtime after hours or weekends is really starting to erode very quickly. So let's get into talking more about the testing and planning side of this. just as a quick refresher, I'm a big believer in thinking about when you're running tests and exercises for either business continuity or disaster recovery. It's not a linear one-off event. They are very much a cyclical, continuous event. And so I just wanted to quickly show here the cycle, at least as Forrester has defined it, for how we have the plan, the planning for testing and exercises, the life cycle goes. So, it starts with defining the scenarios, getting sign-off from executives, preparing, and then only then do you conduct a test, but then you see you're only halfway through this cycle. Afterwards you need to debrief, do reporting. Of course, if the test was unsuccessful, it needs to be rerun within a period of time. And then, very importantly, plans and documentation need to be updated. And then you're getting right back into defining the scenarios again. And in fact, the companies that I talk to that are most mature in this, they're essentially constantly testing. This test life cycle is never ending. And then also a quick note on the test types and frequencies. Also, just a quick refresher as background. There's not, especially in disaster recovery, there's often the misconception that there is just one kind of test, and it's a big, full test. But of course, I'm actually a big believer in lots of very different types of tests. And I have here, for example, some of the different test types you might see from the IT side, and in how frequently you might want to run them and what they compose of. As you can see, the first two, walkthroughs and tabletops, are really non-technical exercises. And this is something that we, of course, see in business continuity a lot, but in disaster recovery less so. And I find these can be extremely helpful because, as I'm sure many of you on the phone know, a lot of the time the big challenge with DR testing is not in the technical side, but it's in the people. It's in people not knowing their responsibilities, not knowing their plans, not knowing where things are and what they're supposed to do. And then, of course, there's the two types of technical tests that I outlined: component tests, which are like small-scale tests, based on platform or criticality, and then a full test or full exercise or a simulation, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So one of the things that I'm seeing that makes me pretty happy is that overall, the planning, maintenance, and testing for disaster recovery are improving. And so a lot of the process that goes along with disaster recovery are getting better. And I know this because of the Forrester and Disaster Recovery Journal survey that we run every year, and we just got the results back and published them in the winter edition of the journal, and hopefully you saw that. But I'm going to highlight some of the data from that now. So moving along to look at how often organizations are running a full disaster recovery test. On the next slide, you can see that 71% are testing their DR plan at least once a year. Now that's good news. This is definitely getting better compared with past years. You can see that the big chunk of people, 40%, are doing that once-a-year test. But there's the 20% are doing, and this is full tests we're asking about specifically. 20% are doing twice a year. 11% are doing more than twice a year. So that's great. Although, I do have to point out that there is that 17% of you that do say we do not test our plan, do not do full tests of our plan at all. Of course, I want to see that number shrinking, and that number is a bit worrying, but this is a definitely improvement over what we've seen in the past. However, this is a bit of a mixed bag because when we ask organizations if they feel that their plans are very complete or robust, you can see here that it's not totally all positive. So 61% say, yes, I do have a formal plan in place and I feel it's robust and complete, but there's that 36% that say, we have a partial plan. And I suspect that this is true for a lot of organizations, that they have a plan in place and maybe it's only for a certain site, or maybe it's only for a certain set of applications, or maybe it's just not comprehensive, it's not in-depth enough. So, of course, it's great to see that 61% with that full, robust plan, but a lot of you are, or, about a little more than a third of you are feeling, we've got a partial plan and it's not totally complete. But, moving on, and when it comes to looking at how often people are updating their plans, there's definitely some good news here, especially when we look at the 2010 versus 2013 data sets. So you can see here that this green and continuously, which is how would be the best practice for updating your plans. It's gone from 23% of companies doing that in 2010 up to 35% in 2013. So definitely some improvement there. And as I'm sure you all know, continuously keeping your plans up to date as part of like a change management or release management cycle is definitely the best practice. And I'm happy to see that there's more people growing there, and I think there's just continuous room for improvement. But I'm happy to see that this is getting better. However, despite the fact that we've had some improvements on the process side, we've seen some improvements on the testing, we've seen some improvements on the planning side, there's still challenges. And the biggest one then when we asked all of you, what are your big challenges when recovering from your most recent event, this did not surprise me at all to see that mismatched business expectations with IT capabilities was the big one. And this is something I see over and over again, whether we haven't communicated well, and of course you can see lack of communication between IT and the business is the second biggest challenge. Whether it hasn't been communicated well, whether the business has unrealistic expectations, whether we haven't properly gone through a BIA to really understand what the business expectations or requirements are. There's a lot of different ways that this can fall short, and even into things as simple as definition of terms. Something that one of my favorite things to talk about is, what's the difference between how we think about RTO and IT and how the business thinks about RTO. So, simple term, recovery time objective, we all think we know what it means, but it actually sometimes means different things to different people. So when in IT, oftentimes when we talk about RTO, we say, okay, the clock starts the minute I start recovering the system or the machine or the application, and it ends when I'm done recovering it, when it's up and running. But of course, someone on the business side actually sees that clock starting as the moment the system goes down. And then there's that time to declare. Then there's the time to recover. Then there's the time to validate, and then there's the time to return to normal. So what I see, maybe if I'm in IT and I see RTO as 4 hours, the business might actually see the total downtime as 8 hours. We might be using the same words, but we're not speaking the same language. And unfortunately, this is a big challenge. And, some of these challenges are reflected when we get into some of the recovery time actuals. And when we think, when this is a survey where in this question we ask people how much downtime and how much data loss did you incur after your last disaster or major disruption. And you can see we've got a little comparison from 2010 to 2013. And, it's just unfortunate to see that recovery time actuals are getting longer. The median is 8 hours for the RTA, up from 3 hours in 2010. You can see from that graph, too, that less than 1 hour group shrunk way down, and a lot of it went into the longer, that, that 30-plus hours went up a little bit as well. Same story, well, a similar story in recovery point objective. It didn't improve, but it didn't really get much worse either. So when we look at data loss, recovery point objectives, actual data loss, on the next slide, it's really remaining generally flat. So it's good to see that, the median recovery point actual at 2013 and 2010 was where they were still both 0. But overall, when you look at some of the some of the bars in this chart, you can see that while the median stayed flat, some of the the 6 to 10 hour of data loss jumped up a bit. The 10+ hours of data loss jumped up a bit, and overall there was even though the median was flat, I think there was a little bit more of the recovery of recovery point actual length. The other thing, too, that, this is not necessarily good news or bad news, but interesting to note that the top causes of disasters really remain the same. So when we look at the things that have caused downtime, the causes of the most significant or major disaster that people have experienced recently, it's the same kind of culprits: power failure, IT failure, network failure. But the thing is, a lot of them are, more operational and potentially preventable. Human error definitely continues to remain high on the list. The one thing that did for sure shift, though, is that it used to be in a 5-year span, we would predict that 1 in 5 companies would declare a disaster. Now, as of the latest survey, it's in a 5-year span, 1 in 4 companies have declared a disaster. And a lot of it is for the same types of causes, the same types of challenges that we run into. So, wrapping up, the thing that, if I'm going to leave you with a couple of recommendations before I, pass you off to Dylon, I know that this might sound a little bit fluffy, but the organizations that I've seen be most successful in their overall strategy have stopped thinking about recovery, have stopped focusing on recovery, and have been trying to move everything towards resiliency. So just on a terminology level, I have a lot of problems with the word recovery. First of all, it means you failed. It means you went down and you had to come back. You probably had data loss. You probably had downtime. And it's also very reactive. Something happens and you react to it. And oftentimes, in the classic world of recovery, we're not proactively testing systems. We're not proactively failing over, which, by the way, is one of the, even during some of these events that you saw that were more predictable. Obviously, it's hard to predict like a power failure or a hardware failure, but something like a hurricane, you see that coming. And, I did a study on Hurricane Sandy and looked at how organizations responded and reacted to Hurricane Sandy, and so few proactively went over to their DR sites. And so a lot of it is trying to, instead of wait and see what happens, trying to get ahead of the problems. So organizations that I see be more successful are trying to get into this world of resiliency, which is trying to be able to spring back from disruption without an outage or with minimal downtime, with minimal data loss, trying to get ahead of problems before they happen, trying to proactively solve issues and solve challenges. And, unfortunately, in this new world that I've been talking about with, more data loss, increased data growth, less tolerance for downtime, less tolerance for data loss, more mobile users, all of these challenges, and of course, more complexity and more change. A lot of what we've done in the past for disaster recovery is just not going to cut it for the future. And some say that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, that's a little bit what we've been doing in disaster recovery. We've been doing the same thing over and over again. We've been trying to approach our processes and our solutions the same way, and really getting the same results and expecting things to get better, but in fact, as you saw from the recovery time, recovery point actuals, they're getting a bit worse. So if I was going to leave you with a couple of tips, the thing I would remind you is that if anything, you need to focus on automation to try and keep up with the changes in IT and in the business. We're past the scale of the type of complexity that we can handle as human beings. We need to be able to automate as much as possible, automate discovery, automate failover, automate our process in order to keep up with the recovery objectives that are being demanded by the business. The other thing, too, that I think is very important is understand what are your most relevant risks and mitigate them. So when we think about, a lot of times people think about disasters, they think about large-scale events, they think about hurricanes and terror events and earthquakes and things that are classically known as disasters. But of course, most downtime is actually caused by more mundane things, preventable things. 67% of quote-unquote disasters, data center outages, are caused by mundane things. So why aren't we getting ahead of these more? Why aren't we doing more proactive problem management? Why aren't we doing more proactive failover? And why aren't we trying to actually address the risks that are maybe less exciting but are much more likely to impact us? And lastly, in IT as a whole, and especially in resiliency, the only thing constant is change. So if we are thinking about our resiliency and availability initiatives as projects or as events and not as something that's continuously baked into our daily lives, it's not going to work. We're not going to be able to succeed because, the second you walk away from a resiliency project, everything changes. Requirements change, or the configurations change, or new applications are deployed. And so thinking about resiliency and availability as more of a baked-in thread rather than a one-off project or plan is really the best way to try and keep up with all of these challenges. And that's all from me for now. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm going to pass it on now to Dylon Mills from Symantec.
Thank you, Rachel. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. So now I'd like to switch gears and focus our attention towards a product by Symantec that is targeted at assisting the efforts previously mentioned by Rachel. What we have observed by interviewing numerous customers and also through Rachel's presentation is that availability requirements continue to increase. And at the same time, our IT service is becoming increasingly more complex. So it's heavily compartmentalized with multiple layers and multiple teams. What we look to do with the Disaster Recovery Advisor is provide you with a tool to automate the discovery of high availability disaster recovery risks in your environment. Now, I'll talk more to that, but first let's discuss understanding real availability needs. So availability needs can actually be a lot higher than expected. This is because we often associate downtime tolerances with a particular business service. An example of a business service can be enterprise resource planning or our ERP system. We can have multiple components that make up this service, and if the service requires less than 52.56 minutes a year of downtime in order to achieve 99.99% availability, then that actually equates to less than 5.26 minutes a year of downtime per component. So getting into what Disaster Recovery Advisor is, as I mentioned before, DRA is a tool to automate the discovery of HADR risks across your environment. The tool uses agentless technology to collect read-only configuration information from target systems, so those systems being servers, storage, databases, and virtualized infrastructure. Once it collects the configuration information, it then runs an analysis on your current configurations to identify risks in your environment. So the tool runs on a scheduled basis, so it's not continuously pinging your systems for information, and most customers using the product today run on either a daily or weekly basis. Finally, what the tool will do is generate tickets containing full details of risks identified in your environment, as well as suggestions to resolve the risks that are identified. So on this next slide here, talking about high availability and disaster recovery risks, what I included here was a high-level summary provided to us by a customer of what Disaster Recovery Advisor is. I'll give you a second to read it. But what I like is they put it simply, it's like antivirus software that looks for local or remote failover signatures instead of virus signatures. So moving into, Gartner released a report discussing IT maturity model and how each step represents improvements to IT availability. At a very high level, the first two steps represent the ability to find and fix issues when outages occur. The next step deals with implementation of processes and tools for ensuring high availability and disaster recovery. And then step 4 is about monitoring and testing current configurations associated with a particular business service. And then finally, the last step involves integration of tools, processes, and procedures to forecast potential outages. So DRA is really the only tool that we know of in the market today that automatically discovers and reports upon high availability disaster recovery risks across the entire IT environment. And through the use of this tool, it accelerates your organization up the maturity scale, which reduces costs and reduces downtime. Going back to stage 3 and discussing how DRA enables the IT maturity model, the tool offers regular scanning of the IT infrastructure to review the risks that are found. And I've included a pie chart here to show you kind of how those risks are broken down typically in a customer's environment. In Stage 4, DRA offers a high-level view of risk exposure associated with each and every individual business service, providing you the ability to define SLAs for DRA to check. And then finally, DRA offers the ability to integrate with existing systems like CMDBs and ticket management tools, enabling Stage 5 of the IT maturity model. So in review, availability requirements continue to increase as our IT service becomes increasingly more complex. We need to find and fix HADR risks before they become a problem. DRA is the only solution that provides the ability to scan the entire IT infrastructure and proactively report upon HADR risks located throughout the environment. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for questions. And you guys can ask questions to either myself or Rachel, but let us know by sending a quick text to any questions that you have regarding whatever Rachel covered in the beginning, or also Disaster Recovery Advisor.
Great, thanks a bunch. And again, as Dylan mentioned, you can ask questions, or a question panel you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. First question here we have today, what is the recommended configuration for DRA?
Okay, that's a good question. So Disaster Recovery Advisor is installed on a Windows 2008 R2 server. The server can be physical or virtual with specific sizing requirements. So you size the physical or virtual server according to the size of the environment that you're currently scanning. And then the product also uses or utilizes Oracle 11g as its repository.
Oops, did you get that? I'm sorry. Let me read it again here. I have a large number of servers and storage. How does DRA scale?
So currently we have current scaling limitations at around 33,000 hosts. So DRA, and that's 33,000 scanned hosts. So DRA is able to scan or scale fairly large to whatever size environment that you currently have today. We have current implementations of DRA that are reaching close to 10,000, upwards of 10,000 hosts, and they're also expanding upon that, expanding to the size of the environment that they're currently scanning. So our current limitations are right around 33,000 hosts, scanned hosts.
All right. Any suggestions on how to get executive buy-in?
So in order to get executive buy-in, one thing that you really need to do is also get buy-in from the many various teams that this product touches. So you do need to start the conversation with the teams that this tool, through the use of this tool, the many various teams like the server admin, the storage admin, database admin, talk to those teams first to get their buy-in, to want to identify, to proactively identify risk in their environment. And then once you have the buy-in from those many various teams, then you can shoot a little higher and bring the conversation to the higher level.
All right, next question here. How does DRA scan the devices in a large-scale environment? Does it deploy agents on the servers, network, storage devices?
So great question. So the product does not actually use agents to collect the information. So what we need is for you to configure read-only user accounts in the various systems that we're looking to scan. And for scanning the various systems, like, for example, when we're scanning storage systems, we connect through the proxy. We set up read-only user accounts for DRA to utilize and connect to through standard ports, so SSH, WMI, to send the read-only configuration commands and gather that information. So once it connects to the various systems, using that read-only user account, it then disconnects and then runs its analysis in the background.
All right, another question here. Do we need to integrate DRA with any other enterprise tools?
So to answer that specific question, you don't need to integrate the product with any other tools. It can work as a completely standalone product. It offers a ticketing system within the product itself. So tickets that are identified, you're able to manage the tickets through the product itself. But on top of that, you do have the ability to integrate it with systems in your environment. So like I mentioned before, you can pull the information of your environment from a CMDB. You can also integrate it with current ticketing systems that you use in your environment so that you can export on an automated basis the tickets that are identified by DRA to your ticket management console that you're currently using in your environment. So just to answer that question in a high level, you don't have to integrate DRA with any other products in your environment, but we do provide the ability to integrate with other products in your environment.
All right, what type of information does it collect, and how does this play into organizations' privacy policies?
So as I mentioned before, it's just collecting read-only configuration information, so how the various systems are connected to other systems in your environment. It's not collecting any confidential information other than it will need IP addresses, but it's just collecting read-only configuration information and then assessing your current configurations in your environment according to a lot of one of the slides mentioned that we have over 5,000 risk signatures in the product. What those risk signatures are either known misconfigurations with specific products that we support that customers have reported to us through using the product, as well as we collect vendor best practice recommendations for configuration. So we work with all the products and platforms that we currently support with the product. We work with those vendors to collect their best practice recommendations for configuration. And that's something that we are analyzing in your environment. But we're analyzing your current configurations against the best practice recommendations for configuration. Now, I'm sorry, there was a second part to that question. Can you repeat the second part?
Oops, hold on one second. Let me get back over that page. And how does it play into the privacy policy of the organization?
Got it. So I guess it's difficult for me to comment on that specifically right now, but as far as the product does not share any information externally. It's completely contained and housed within your environment, and the teams that are responsible for configuring and setting up the product, they have complete control over what the product collects and what information the product currently has. So I guess I can't answer that question in depth right now, but I may be able to follow up further with that question after doing a little bit of research.
All right, and that looks like our final question here today. There are a few questions we did not get to. If we didn't get to your question, it's a question we deem or I felt may be best handled offline. So you will be getting an email follow-up from Dylon here on the next day or so. So any additional questions, you can certainly reach out to Rachel or Dylon as well. Also, any parting words here to Dylon or Rachel?
No, but thank you very much for attending. And, I think a lot of what Dylon was talking about comes back to my core recommendation of automation, whether it's a process automation or a technology automation, and trying to keep up with the change from that perspective and in this always changing world that we live in.
Yep, and from my side, I really appreciate your time today. So thank you for joining, and hopefully you learned a little bit about this new product by Symantec.
Wonderful. Thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope you found some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Rachel and Dylon for their time here today, as well as Symantec for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording of this webinar. You may view it as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thank you again, and this now ends today's webinar.